Welcome to the Outlier's Journey, where we'll explore the human stories of inspiring paths to success in the African American and the Caribbean immigrant communities. My name is John Seaton, and I've always been fascinated with folks who manage to break away from their circumstance and somehow achieve more than their peers. In the discussion today, we'll uncover those turning points in our guests' lives that we might enlighten and inspire others, especially those listening that may find themselves in a similar circumstance. So let's get started. Today, I want to welcome Troy James to the podcast. We'll explore Troy's journey from pre-gentrified Jersey City. That's not the cool Jersey City that everyone thinks of now. Troy grew up at a time during the height of the crack epidemic and the emergence of gangs. Now he finds himself all the way to Cisco in his current role as senior manager for software renewals. We'll uncover in this conversation that his journey wasn't an easy one. He grew up as a quiet and shy, actually a skinny kid who loved to read comic books. Now, of course, that brought with it some challenges growing up in Jersey City in the 70s. We'll learn how Troy managed to break out of his shell. And for those natural introverts out there like me, you might get something out of this podcast. Troy studied economics at Rutgers University. He has an MBA from the University of Maryland and a certificate in enterprise architecture from Penn State University. So with that, Troy, welcome to the podcast.
Great. Thank you, John. Appreciate you having me here.
Yeah, I always appreciate those who are willing to tell those stories that might help benefit some other folks out there. So I want to begin with the here and now, and then we'll circle back to where it all started. So tell us a little bit about yourself, your work, your family situation, where you're currently living.
Yeah, thank you, John. Yes, I've been happily married now for 27 years to my lovely wife, Stacey Ann James. And we have raised, or in process of raising, two children, Brandon James, Sydney James. Brandon is a senior at Rowan University here in New Jersey, and Sydney is in her freshman year at Fordham. And we reside out here in Western New Jersey, out in Hunterdon County, as they call it, horse country back in the day. But it's very nice community to raise a family in. We're very happy out here. So we've been out here for 14, going on 15 years now.
So a little bit different than where you grew up. You went west, right?
Absolutely. Yes. This is out here in Western New Jersey, somewhat unknown. Sometimes people ask, like, where do you live? I said, well, I'm in the New York metro area.
There you go. That's probably the easiest way to describe it. So as you know, and I think you've listened to a couple of these podcasts, it's all about folks who have come from a situation, and you can describe that situation as being a little bit challenged and now have reached a level of success, sort of that American dream. And you've got that nuclear family with a house, and maybe you even have a picket fence around it. And some define that as success, but everyone's got a different definition. So I always ask my guests, what's your definition of success?
I say my definition of success is being able to be in a stable situation, being confident and sure of yourself, having a plan and knowing your pathway, where you're going, looking back and being proud of your accomplishments, right? You can always say you could have done more, but at the same time, you're happy with where you are. You are able to deal with the various changes and challenges that life is going to throw at you as society continues to evolve. And I always tell people, I can sleep easy at night because I know that I've done the best I can. I'm preparing for problems tomorrow or twists and turns, but I do not let stress creep into my life, if at all possible.
I hear that. A lot of people, and I talk to a lot of people at work who are struggling with stress. Sometimes I tell them, you got to put things into perspective, right?
Absolutely.
These are people who have a family, who have a house, they're all healthy, their kids are healthy. I don't know. To me, that's not a stressful situation. I know that's kind of maybe not a deep way to look at it, but, I think a lot of us are fortunate in the situations that we are. And sometimes you do got to take a step back and take perspective. Maybe the advantage that we have, Troy, is that we came up in situations where we have perspective. And so that's where we're going to get into how we've obtained that perspective, because if we go back to where your journey began, there were challenges, right? So I think there's an appreciation for us who reach a certain level of success that even though, yes, there's stresses within life, we can always reflect back to a time that was harder. And we're like looking around now, it's like, well, we're nowhere as stressed as our parents were, right?
Oh, absolutely. My parents came up obviously very, very humble background. My mother, she was born and raised in Jersey City, and coming from the 1930s all the way through the various decades. And my father, he was part of the last part of the Great Migration from the South. He was born and raised in South Carolina, Jim Crow, South Carolina, and made the journey to Jersey City shortly after high school, and lived with his brother for a period of time before really striking out on his own as a young man with very little guidance, transitioning from rural South Carolina up to the big cities. If anyone knows that time period, was not a lot to do down in South Carolina from a growth perspective. So realistically, he knew he had to leave town. He was going to go into the military, but at the time, it just was not in the cards for him. The branch he wanted to go into, they were being somewhat selective, and just wasn't optimal, and timeframes did not work. And so he had a brother who lived in Jersey City, an older brother, and he reached out to him to say, "Hey, can I come north?" And he said, "Sure, no problem." But coming to Jersey City, life was hard back then. Things were not as great in the north as people might have thought. Right? Everyone from down south thought it was a great opportunity to move to the north, right? Find opportunity, right? Live the American dream. But when you came up here, it was a different level of challenges from a social, economic, and racial perspective, even in the urban areas at the time.
Yeah, I did a little bit of research on the Great Migration because when we spoke and you said when your father came up, and so I was like, well, what was this really all about? And so this was the movement of some 6 million African Americans from the rural areas of the South. And you said your father came from the rural areas of South Carolina, who moved up to urban areas in the North. And this happened between 1916 and 1970. And the driving forces were, as you would imagine, escape from racial violence, pursue economical and educational opportunities, and to get away from the oppression of Jim Crow. So it sounds like that's exactly why your father, moved up north. But as you said, the streets weren't necessarily paved with gold, right? There were challenges even when they did get up here, right? So, so it sounds like your dad ended up in Jersey City, and your mother was a native of Jersey City, right?
Correct. She was born and raised. And again, she came from a very humble background. Her father passed away. I believe she was only 13 years old, and it was a family of 8 at the time. And, she always told me the story where they were denied public assistance at the time, even though my grandmother didn't work. And I believe at the time it was undiagnosed, but I believe she was, from what it was described, she was going through some level of depression. So the girls who were the oldest, my aunts, really had to step up and lead the family. They had to basically build relationships, put food on the table every night, work at an early age. They built relationships with butchers around town to get meat and produce, secondhand clothing, but they were always clean and proud and did the best that they could. And they worked hard. Then, my father, again, he worked multiple jobs coming up, not optimal jobs. He's telling me, I think he was making $1 an hour. So it would take 40 hours to make $40 in a given week. When he moved out on his own, he was basically renting one room. He had one room and a transistor radio, and that was it. He just started to build from there.
So what was Jersey City like?
So Jersey City, I would say at that time, typical urban area. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Jersey City. They have various sections. So you have the Heights, you have downtown, you have the Greenville section. So the Greenville section where the majority of the African Americans resided. And that's where they met. And when they were married, they basically started renting. We started renting an apartment downtown Jersey City. Then after I was born, we moved uptown to Greenville. And the house we moved into was very surprising enough. We were there, I think, for a few months, and it was sold right off underneath him. The landlord didn't even tell my father. Someone came one day and started taking out windows and the heating system, and he didn't realize it. He got the notion from folks he worked with to buy a house And this was unheard of. He said he had never conceptualized actually buying a house. It was just something that just was not even discussed in the Black community at the time from his upbringing. But
Mm-hmm.
he talked to the folks that he worked with, and they said, yes, we all own homes. You can buy a home on your own. And the realtor said, for the money that you're spending on rent, if you buy a 2-family house and you rent one apartment and
Yeah.
live in the other, you're almost there in terms of your mortgage. So he got that notion. And even a lot of our relatives were somewhat skeptical of his plan because it seemed so far-fetched at the time. But he said, you know what? I'm going to go for it. I'm going to go on a lurch and just say, maybe I can make this happen. Right? He just took a chance, and it worked out very well. We lived in our own house. But I always think of look at a home as just a very stable base for you and your family, just to give you that sense of comfort that you're in a very stable and comforting situation.
And it's a way to build generational wealth, right?
Absolutely.
Prior to that, if no one in your family, grandparents or great grandparents had homes, then there's nothing really to pass on. So once you got a house, you build equity,
Mm-hmm.
and then that helps the next generation. It's a little less challenging, right, for them to
Correct.
do what they got to do. Did he buy that house when you guys moved to East Orange, or was that in Jersey City?
That was our first house in Jersey City.
Okay.
Yes. So we
Okay.
bought that house. I think I was probably about 4 or 5 years old at the time we
Mhm.
purchased that house.
Mhm.
And then I started out in the public school system. As a kindergarten, I started at public school system, PS 41. And then when I transitioned to grade school, I started attending Sacred Heart School in the Greenville section, me and my brother.
So what I want to get to is the summer of '79,
Mhm.
right? So there's this concept of what we call white flight. And
Right.
so a lot of people out there may not know what that means, but it's related to gentrification. It's sort of the opposite.
Mhm.
Well, it is the opposite
Mhm.
of gentrification, where a lot of Black families find themselves, they may have been the first ones to start to move into a white neighborhood, but then as soon as that happened, especially in the late '70s, early '80s, a lot of the white families moved out. So you told me the story of when that started to happen in your neighborhood. And can you tell me a little bit about that?
So it was an interesting time. We moved to the Greenville section, we lived on Bayview Avenue, and it was fairly integrated. I would say about 60-40,
Mm-hmm.
60% Black, 40% Caucasian families. But what happened as we started to pivot towards the late 70s, that's when a lot of the drugs and the gang culture started to build in Jersey City. And it was very subtle movement at the time. And you really had to have your ear to the street to know what was happening. And slowly but surely, some of the families started moving out. We had very good, it was very, very good family community. We had the Buckmans, the Artiserts, the Petrillos. And one day, Mr. Petrillo pulled my father to the side and said, hey, Ernie, we've sold our house. And there was no sign ever went up. The house
Yep.
we never noticed anyone. Actually, there was no
They
open
moved
house.
out at night.
Right. We never noticed anyone coming to view the house or anything. But he pulled my father to the side. He said, Ernie, you have a very nice family. I'm going to give you a heads up. We've already sold our house and we're moving down to the shore area. But my friends in the police department said that Jersey City is going to get bad. The drug and the gang culture is going to take off. They have their warning signs are out there. And I'm giving you a heads up that if you want to save your boys, you better start looking. My father was floored. He was never really thinking about moving at the time. And he said, man, I have to take action, because he
Yeah.
really heated the well against. And lo and behold, a few months later, the Petrillos were gone. And that summer, things really started to take a turn in Jersey City. There were defined gangs. There were a lot of events happening at night in terms of, different types of gang violence and shootings. Riots were taking place. There was a bad incident on a block. Someone stole a car and crashed it right across the street from our house. We were out playing that night. Had we been there a few minutes later, could have been a very bad situation. And that was a wake-up call to my father. And we started to look around at other communities. So, he wanted to find a community that obviously was, upper scale, but still had a African American presence in it. And in New Jersey, it's very difficult to find nice integrated communities. We had a family friend who was living in East Orange. He sort of introduced that concept to my father, and we started to look at a home over there. Found a place that was optimal for us. And this time we were moving from a 2-family house to a single family house, and it was more of a, if you know East Orange, it's more of a suburban area. They used to call it at the time more of an upper urban area. So elements of suburbs, but still had a bit of an urban feel to it. So it's something that was very comfortable for us.
You said you went to Catholic school for like first through ninth grade, right?
Correct. Mm-hmm. This is where there was again a bit of a challenge. My brother and I, we were somewhat of oddballs. As we discussed before, we were avid comic book readers, and I had a few friends of mine who read comic books as well. But it was not a common thing in Jersey City, if you can imagine. We were just big into comic books, and I'd be sitting there doodling and drawing superheroes. Some of my friends tease me to this day, say, "You were the guy always drawing Spider-Man and all that." But I kind of took a lot of solace in it because it actually enhanced me a bit. Reading certain sophisticated comics such as Fantastic Four, the X-Men, Marvel Comics, as we've seen now with the success of the MCU, they would delve into very sophisticated topics. I would oftentimes have my dictionary out looking up words as I'm reading through to understand what I'm reading. And it helped me not only from a vocabulary perspective, but also in my writing and my critical thinking. Just understand the continuities of the stories and breaking things down. But as you can imagine, you could get teased for that, right? You're not the regular, you kind of weren't the regular kid. They always tell us that we talk funny. I remember the story. I used the term ego. I said something like fed someone's ego, and they said, "You always use such big words." And I said, "It's 3 letters. What do you mean?"
Now, you mentioned the MCU. For those who aren't comic book heads out there, what's that mean?
Oh, that's the Marvel Comics universe. So all of the big headliner movies that's been out, like such as the Avengers and Spider-Man, that's all spawned out of Marvel Comics, which used to be just regular printed comic book magazines that are now big blockbuster movies.
So why did your parents put you in Catholic school?
I think because it was a bit of a rough environment. I think they wanted to give us the best opportunity from an educational standpoint. That's one of the things at the time. My father was neither my father nor my mother were graduates of secondary education, but they saw the value in it. And it was a way of also keeping us safe. Still in the cities, although when we first moved there, it's Jersey City, it was a family-friendly environment, but still some rough parts there. And they knew that sending us to public school was not setting us up for the greatest level of success. And, they made the sacrifice and paid for us to attend Catholic school. Through 1979, 1980, I actually went on to attend St. Peter's Preparatory School, downtown Jersey City. And that was a strict Jesuit. It's all boys Jesuit high school.
Wow.
So very, very strict. I mean, you could get detention there for just looking wrong. Okay. So if you didn't have your tie to your neck, that's detention. So you had to be crisp, sharp, and ready to go.
So I can relate to Sacred Heart. I spent 8 years. Sounds like I was in prison, right? I attended Catholic school for 8 years at Holy Cross in Brooklyn. So I know the type of education you get there. And that was typically, parents who wanted something better for their kids, especially in the inner city, sent their kids to private school. At that time was Catholic school, which it wasn't that expensive. But of course, if you had multiple kids who you had to send, then it did add up in terms of cost. So it sounds like your parents were willing to sacrifice that for you guys.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it was one of the things. My mother actually worked in the school system, so she sort of knew what it had to offer. They made that sacrifice and sent us there. Okay,
so you end up at East Orange High School, right? How'd that happen after going to St. Peter's, right? As freshman year.
So I finished out the year at St. Peter's. I didn't want to transfer mid-year, but it was a bit of a commute. And also I was I'd been outside of my natural community. I wanted to meet people within my local community. And also I wanted to save my parents some money. I was thinking I really want to go to college, and I don't want to have the financial burden of them paying for high school and college. Again, and it was a bit of a difference transferring over.
A bit of a culture shock, right? All boys private school to East Orange High School?
Yes, actually, it's East Orange had 2 high schools at the time. You had East Orange High School and Clifford J. Scott High School. So I attended Clifford Scott. That was my high school on my side of the town. But yeah, quite a bit different. And you can imagine from a disciplinary perspective, not exactly the same. I was one of the kids that used to be when the bell rang, I was sitting in class with my notebook out, pencil out, ready to go, because that's what I was taught. If you were still at St. Peter's or Sacred Heart, if you were still reaching for your notebook when the bell rang or didn't have your pen out, that's considered late and you had detention. So I continued that on at Clifford Scott. When I was sitting ready to go, everyone was still in the hallway. So they said, "Who is this guy that's always sitting in class?" So of course, people, our kids they would take notice of that and start to give you a little jabs here or there. Plus, I had no fashion sense at all because coming from an all boys school,
right,
no one cared.
Everybody was on an equal playing field because you wore the same thing, right?
Exactly. And we would play basketball at school in our blazers and ties. No one cared. But going to Clifford Scott, now it was more of a fashion show. Everyone had to have on the Jordache jeans, the Sergio Valente, Izod shirts, the penny loafers. And I didn't notice that until several weeks in. And someone commented one day. And I looked around and it's like, okay, so people are dressed up here. So it's a little bit of this. So it kind of built a little bit of a cognizance of fashion after that. So the vibe was a little bit different from Jersey City. Jersey City, it was an urban area. If you know, from that time, hip hop was starting to emerge.
Yep.
Jersey City was very close proximity to New York. So you had that really raw hip hop type vibe and culture starting in Jersey City. East Orange was for more of a suburban view of that. You had some people who, at the time, if you recall this term, we used to call them homeboys, right? B-boys. A little bit of a different flair. I think people at East Orange might have had a little bit more money, so they had their hip-hop was sort of interlaced with a little more designer wear than you had in Jersey City. Very similar style, but a little bit different here or there.
So were you able to adjust, or were you a little like a fish out of water for a little bit?
I was definitely a fish out of water. Like I said, I was still wired in the mode of being in a strict Jesuit Catholic environment, to be prepared, to be ready to go, not one of the people to get in trouble, not to push the boundaries of the central authority, right? Respect your teachers, make sure you get your work done on time. And transferring in at sophomore year was very rough because everyone already had all the established friends. And as we'll talk more about, I'm the type of person, I'm more comfortable when I can get my posse, when I can align with people who are like me and kind of like-minded and kind of share my values. That's where I'm most comfortable. And I always seek that in all of my situations that I'm in. And it took a while because everyone there was already established. They had already attended grade school and middle school together. And here you come as a sophomore that you don't have those relationships built. But I've kind of made that conscious decision. Again, I wanted to try to build relationships within my local community. So I took the plunge, and it was rough for a little while. I did actually, one of the things that helped me, I had another friend of mine. He was transferring in from New York at the same time. A friend of mine named Cornell. And we started becoming friends. And he was more of an extrovert and I was an introvert. And he started to introduce me around, and I started meeting other people. And again, I kind of started building that posse of people, some good friends that I'm still friends with to this day. So that helped with the transition, but it was rough in the beginning. You do realize that you're sort of an outsider. You don't have anybody to roll with. You're just sort of to yourself. Again, I always had my friendly comic books, so I had no problem being by myself at times, but it did take a little while, and those are critical years, but I got through it with no problem.
Yeah. So you had an outlet, which was your comic books. And it sounds like you had a friend who was an extrovert, so that helped.
Mm-hmm.
The danger, obviously, is, and maybe somebody listening to this who's in a new environment, is not to succumb to the negative peer pressure.
Correct.
And so it sounds like you did not do that. You were patient to find, like you said, like-minded people, because it's important to understand that you are who you hang out with. You become that group, even though you may think you won't. And so it sounds like you followed that path that kept you in the right direction.
Exactly. Yes. If you pick the wrong crowd, that becomes your brand and your signature. So don't go down the wrong path, hanging with the wrong kids just because, hey, I want to have friends. I want to be one of the cool kids. No, it's not necessary.
A lot of these conversations that I've been having with other folks about their high school experience, they've told me about either a counselor or a program They kind of put their arm around their shoulder and gave them some guidance. But when I spoke with you, you said that wasn't your experience.
So yeah, it was sort of interesting. I did hear a lot of the other experiences. And one of the things that I found was that the expectations were relatively low. So when I reached senior year, my expectation was always to go to college. By that time, my mother had gone back to school. So she had been out of school, married, working, raising a family for over 20 years. And the Jersey City Educational Board came through with a mandate that within a certain period of time, you had to have a degree in order to maintain everyone's job. So my mother had to go back to school. After 20 years, she had to go back to a classroom. And she completed her undergraduate degree at what's now New Jersey City University, and went on to obtain her master's at St. Peter's. So the expectation was already there that I'm going to go to college. My brother, he attended college as well. So I started applying and applied to a couple of universities because the experience was less different. I didn't go on campus visits that a lot of the kids go on now. So I applied to where I knew. I knew about Rutgers because it was in New Jersey. I knew about Montclair State, and I knew about Penn State. Penn State was sort of a long shot because I knew about it from football, watching college football. The one time I actually met with my guidance counselor, she sort of had lower expectations. She sort of just introduced possibly going to lower tier schools, possibly community college. And I sat there and listened, and she didn't really inquire, well, what was my aspirations? What was I trying to accomplish? Right. And if I'd even applied anywhere. It was like the first and only time I met with her. At the end of the meeting, I said, well, I'm already accepted to college. So that's where, I've already made my decision. I'm going to Rutgers. Thank you very much. So I was a little bit put off from that because it would seem like she just sort of had a relatively low expectation of her. And maybe it was possibly because of the situation that she was in. At the time, there was not, majority of the students were not going to college that I graduated with. But would have been nice if she had actually checked my transcript, checked my record, and try to push you to higher tier. If anything, right? Go higher, and maybe if you go higher, and maybe you have a fallback plan, not start at a lower level for a recommendation.
So it sounds like you can't always depend on your guidance counselor to guide you in the right direction. Fortunately, you had your parents, and especially with your mother's example, which is an incredible example of having to go back to school and earn a degree after 20 years, gave you that North Star of like, well, yeah, I'm going to do that too. And then even your father had a lot of things that he was teaching you as well in terms of going that extra mile, which I don't even think we've talked about yet, right? So you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, like I said, my father is very inspiring person for me. In addition to how we acquired our first home, he also taught me about work ethic as well as taking care of responsibilities. When we moved to East Orange that first year, there was a recession in '82, and actually it was a double dip recession. I think it was '82 and '83, and his company folded. His company went out of business. So here we are now, no tenant to offset any of the mortgage, and he's out of work.
Yeah, things could have gone bad.
Exactly. But he said during that period of time, he never missed a beat in terms of any late payments, never had any credit problems or anything because he always had a plan. He saved accordingly. And even now, he's taken a step back from that. I mentioned before, he's a truck driver. So one of the things he said he did when he started driving truck, he used to drive the smaller trucks, regular, maybe about a 15, 20-foot truck. The real value and the valuable skill set was driving the big rigs, the 18-wheelers. So he started learning that. He leveraged people to teach him how to drive the tractor trailers, just pulling the boxes in and around the yard after work. So he'd work a full shift, and he would find someone who would work with him how to back it in, turn corners and such. And he said, and it's always stuck with me, look for ways to make yourself valuable. So when he learned that skill set offline, when an opening came up, when they were in a pinch for 18-wheelers, he was able to move into that slot. And it was a higher paying job because it requires a higher level of skill set. Now, even being out of work in '82, he was able to find a lot of pickup work because as people were on vacation or sick days, they would need drivers, especially on 18-wheelers, because not a lot of people could drive an 18-wheeler. And eventually, he was able to get slotted in on a permanent role at another company without too many problems. But that always stuck with me. Make yourself valuable at any turn, and you'll be able to make your way.
Let's shift gears now. So you had that counselor. She wasn't very encouraging, but you do manage to get into a decent college. So talk to me a little bit about your college admission process.
So it was interesting. As alluded to earlier, at Rutgers, I didn't go on campus visits or anything. And the first time I actually went down to New Brunswick was for placement tests. I'd never seen the college before, had no idea.
Wow.
And nor did I know how large and distributed Rutgers was. I think, you've probably you've been down to Rutgers before.
Yep.
It is a city that's spread across multiple cities. The first time I actually really experienced the campus was moving in. That first day, moving in, parents dropped me off. And from that point, I was somewhat lost. I came in fresh. I didn't know anyone. There were a few people from my high school that were there. But again, Rutgers was so spread out. And these weren't really, none of my friends attended. But again, that kind of started that lost journey. And again, now this is another turn going from a majority Black high school to now going to one of the largest private, what people tend to call PWIs or private white institutions. It was a majority Caucasian school.
Mm-hmm.
It was a bit of a culture shock. You're around people from all over the state, all over the country, all over the world, and just trying to find your posse again amongst 50,000 students was a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, I mean, that's another set of changes that you had to adjust to. One of the things that we talked about was the fact that even that the classes were pretty big, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's very easy to get lost in a large state school
Mm-hmm.
like Rutgers, and so there's certainly an adjustment there. Now, what I want to get to is, so up until this time, correct me if I'm wrong, you're still rather reserved, quiet,
Mm-hmm.
shy.
Right.
And so what broke you out of that?
So starting out, and it's funny, going back, I was actually voted most quietest in high school. So again, I was very just quiet, shy person. And going to like such a large school, it was actually to my detriment, not asking the right questions, not uncovering information, not building my resources appropriately, just figuring out, okay, I could just do it on my own. But one of the things that was a turning point for me is when I pledged my fraternity. It was an opportunity to really sort of break out this shell. I thought to myself, this is the craziest thing I've ever done in my entire life. Like, what am I doing? And if you recall the time, it was a bit of a daunting task. That was a journey. Pledging was, marching around and doing all types of crazy.
You had the traditional hazing that occurs in fraternities.
Yes, as we call it, intake these days.
Oh, that's what they call it, intake.
But at the time, it was like a lot of the traditional activities. But it was one of the things that really would force you out of your shell. I mean, you had to be, because you had to do things in public, marching around, stepping, chanting, and such. You're out in the limelight. And me being a short person, I was in front of the line. So I was the first person you saw. I got the attention. I was not the type of person that could, in a situation where I could be behind the scenes. I was right out front. But again, it was a tremendous challenge. And I always thought, I said, man, you have big guys, right? Athletes that do not complete the process for whatever reason. And I said, how can I do this? How is this going to be, like, how is this going to work? And then, of course, I'm thinking about this after I've already started the process. And I said, man, how is this going to work? But it came down to being mentally strong, being able to, again, keep perspective, prepare, learn your material, being sharp, utilizing your wit, utilizing your speed of thought, your sometimes some people call it my sarcasm, sometimes my quirky humor. But those are the types of things I found to be valuable at the time. And one of the things that it did for me is it really broke me out of the shell, and I use it as an opportunity to somewhat transform my persona a little bit. And not to say in a negative way. Sometimes people say, well, this person pledged and they became the man and whatever. No, you could stay with yourself and stay humble. But what I wanted to do is master certain skills in a proven ground when it didn't count.
Yeah.
So, for instance, whenever we had to put on a program or collaborate with another organization, I would volunteer to be the front person. I would volunteer to lead the effort. Even though my natural persona was to just be quiet, listen to what's going on, and sort of taking someone's lead, I put myself in the lead because I said, after college, this is not a good way to be. Just being a person who is just there and not contributing or not leading or not telling people what my thoughts and ideas are, it's not a good way to be. So I utilize that opportunity as that proving ground because, like I said, I can make a mistake. This doesn't count. This is still fantasy land, right? You're still an undergrad in college, so it's not detrimental to your future. But it allowed me to hone certain skills that I was able to now parlay into later on in life when I did start working. So like I would volunteer to be the MC of an event or to lead an effort, head up a committee, meet with the university, meet with nationals or a regional representative of the fraternity and such. So again, really kind of gave me that opportunity to be out there in front. And one of the other things that we did at the time, we were sort of the underdogs on campus. We were one of the newer organizations, and we were just really getting established. And we said that we are going to be one of the best organizations on this campus. We're going to put ourselves on the map. So taught us how to be excellent, how to really strive and put our best foot forward at every turn.
What's the name of the fraternity?
Oh, Iota Phi Theta fraternity. We were started in 1963 at Morgan State University.
Wow, I think it's the 5th largest Greek fraternity in the country.
Absolutely. Partly what they call the Divine Nine.
There you go. So you learn how to step and all that good stuff.
Very funny. I was when I was actually pledging, I was very, very uncoordinated. Mm-hmm. But again, it was one of those things. Afterwards, I said, I'm going to master this. I said, this is ridiculous. I said, I have to be able to put 2 feet in front of the other. I'm like, come on. And, I used to be part of the step team. We used to put on shows and travel around and such. Yeah, it was really, really fun.
Now, that's cool. So your lesson there is make yourself uncomfortable. Find opportunities if you think you want to improve in a certain area. Mm-hmm. And especially if you got an opportunity to practice, like you said, in an environment where it's safe and you don't want to say it doesn't count. It counts towards your growth, but mm-hmm. there's not anything hinging on you failing at that time, right?
So, correct. I look at college, and we all know it's somewhat about the academic experience, but we all realize we don't remember second year calculus or economics to that degree. It's also growing through the experiences. That's where it really pays dividends. And that's why I think people go away to college or select certain institutions to really sort of utilize that opportunity to grow, right? Grow in a somewhat of a controlled environment, somewhere, like I said, it doesn't count. It's not the real world, as they say. But it's important, obviously, to be successful. Utilize that opportunity to really try things, experiment. Don't be afraid.
And don't be afraid to switch, right? Didn't you switch majors?
I did switch majors. It wasn't necessarily by choice. Originally I was going to be a computer science major, but when I got slammed with, what Rutgers used to have these courses they would call weed out courses. As a large institution, thousands of freshmen would come onto campus. And the classes were large lecture halls. So if you can imagine sitting in a movie theater type setting or a theater, that's what the typical freshman classroom size was like. So it wasn't an intimate setting where you could sit there and interact with the professor and ask questions. You were sitting there amongst 300 people. So you can imagine by sophomore and junior year, those classes were down to regular classroom sizes. So when Rutgers said, look to your left, look to your right, one of you aren't going to be here, they meant 2 of you weren't going to be here. Right, so they could get those classroom sizes down to a manageable size. And at the time, Rutgers did not have business administration. You had to transfer to either Newark or Camden. So economics was the next best thing. And I really like it. It was something I actually became passionate about. I'm still fascinated. One of my hobbies is, pontificating with my friends about politics and economics and finance. So it's something that I really like. And I was able to actually springboard that to get started early in my career.
Cool. So that's the other lesson out there is you may start out doing something in college, and I've heard this time and time again with conversations that I've had, but you may not end with how you thought you began. And it's the 4 years of exploration on what you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And once you get to your career, it may have nothing to do with what you studied in college. And sometimes it does. So it all depends. So
Absolutely.
with that, let's talk about, so now you graduate. Now, how did you navigate the job market? What challenges did you face there fresh out of school?
So I started out working at a small bank in Somerset, just right down the street from Rutgers University, in the bookkeeping department. It was nothing glamorous, but at the time it was a job. I actually met someone. He was a temp at the time, my good friend, Danny Scarrett, who was from a small island called Montserrat. His temp assignment ended, and he got a new assignment over at Morgan Stanley in New York. So he called me up and said, "Hey, Troy, this place is hiring over here." And I said, "Well, what do they do?" He said, "I don't know. I think they do something with real estate." So, yeah, no idea. So I said, "Man, okay." So I went out and I said, "All right, let me go to the library and try to research a little bit," because they said when you interview, you should be relevant to the company you're trying to interview with. So I went out and did some research on a few things and went over to New York and interviewed. Again, it was like a marathon interview for an entire day. I think I interviewed with about 7 people or so. They called me for the job. I passed the interview successfully and started working. So I started working initially in what they call at the time IS Finance, so Information Services Finance. So I handled the billing and invoicing for the mainframe systems, the telecom expenses, and market data feeds that all fed into the bank operations, or the banking and investment banking operations there. After about a year, Morgan was very big on rotating and transitioning people around. So there came an inflection point, and they said, "Well, you could either move into, if you want to stay in finance, you could move into the controllers area, right, more an accounting finance path, or you could move into telecom." And I said, "Well, what's telecom all about?" And they started explaining. They said, "Well, it's maintains the technology that the bank uses for its operation." And I said, "Well, that sounds pretty interesting." And we went over, I interviewed with some folks, and then Morgan had a town hall. They used to do these big town halls, and they talked about the state of the bank. And they started talking about internet and Unix and how this is going to be the next big thing. And I said, "Wow, this is great." So it was an opportunity to be in the forefront of that emergence, of moving the bank to the internet age and learning Unix and all these other technologies. So I said, "This is really great. You could tinker around with technology at work, troubleshoot, play around, and they'll pay you for it." I said, "This is great." So that sort of started my path in the technology area, working there at Morgan. And investment banks, they were on the leading edge of a lot of a lot of the newer and emerging technologies.
And it sounded like your curiosity and what your father taught you in terms of going the extra mile and learning things that helped you in your transition from IT finance to telecom, right?
Oh, absolutely. And again, when I got there, living on the same mantra of making yourself valuable, I became a pretty adept troubleshooter. I learned how to utilize, at the time, a tool called a sniffer. It's a troubleshooting and analyzing tool for the network. And I became the main sniffer guy to troubleshoot and diagnose problems, especially in a situation with investment banking where, those networks are very sensitive. So again, that was the first opportunity to make myself very valuable and become a go-to guy there and help sort of build my brand. And once you start building that brand, starts opening doors for you.
So how'd you end up at Cisco?
So after Morgan, I had a quick stop off at a company called Medco. They're a managed care provider. I think I was there for 2 years. Then as the .com era started to really take off in the late 90s, like around 1998, 1999, I went to work for a Cisco partner called ThroughPoint. ThroughPoint was a pure consulting company, and we used to help companies and service providers get on the network, right? And try to launch emerging technologies such as video over the network or video over the internet, local area networks of all various types and sizes and shapes and use cases. And I was there for about 5.5 years, Throughpoint had gone through various changes. They were supposed to IPO, but they didn't really get to that point. It was time to go, right? They weren't really going in any specific direction. And I'd always maintained very good relationships at Cisco. In the back of my mind, I had built my career around Cisco. I was introduced to Cisco routers at an early age, working at Morgan. And I said, eventually I'm going to go work at Cisco Systems. I worked with one of the SEs there. He hired me on. It was kind of I was finding myself in these odd situations. It was a time when it was after the .com bubble had burst. So I started Cisco in 2004. And Cisco had not hired anyone in about 2 years because all the companies had gone through massive layoffs. Person I interviewed with them, again, it took months to interview. They didn't really have a rec or anything. They wanted me to come on board. So I just had to hang in there. I was interviewing sometimes walking down the street or on a beach, anywhere, just having conversations with people. Yeah. And eventually the rec was approved and I was able to come on board and came on board on the product side. And that was 18 years ago. And it's been a great ride here.
Wow. It's hard to believe it's 18 years because I remember when you didn't work for Cisco and I did. Right. So,
right.
That's really a long time. So what a fascinating story, Troy, and your journey. I always like to summarize some of the lessons that I learned in talking with you at the end of each one of these conversations about your influences and turning points that put you on this path to success. So I've got 3 or 4 that I'll talk about. And then if you got anything to add, jump in. So the first one I got was, hey, you got to give it up to your parents, right? For inspiration and drive. Your father taught you how to make yourself valuable, to go the extra mile, to raise your hand, to get out of your comfort zone. And God bless your mother. After 20 years, she went back to school to get her degree so she can continue in the job she was already doing, right? And so that opened your eyes to college and the value of education. The other thing that I learned from this conversation is that when you go to college, that's the opportunity to get out of your comfort zone. And your fraternity actually helped you to do that. Some people wonder, well, what's the value of a fraternity? Is it, just going to have this network that I'm going to have after I graduate? Well, no, there's personal development that goes on, it sounds like, with your experience that really helped you. And then the one that you can't miss, the skinny, shy kid in Jersey City had his comic books, right? That,
yes.
As you said, gave you your critical thinking, helped you absorb concepts, helped you with your vocabulary. Anything you think I'm missing?
Oh, no, that's spot on. I think that sort of sums me up, John.
Mm-hmm. So what advice would you give your younger self? If there's folks out there sort of in a similar position, some kids growing up in Camden or Jersey City right now, any advice?
I would think one of the things that I always go back to is really stepping outside that comfort zone. I mean, that was big for me. That was a big turning point, and it's not something that's just a cliche. It would pay big dividends later on. And you can do it while maintaining your authenticity. Don't step outside of your zone to try to become someone you're not.
Right.
But look to enhance yourself in areas that you might be weak in from an interpersonal perspective.
Got it. And it sounds like, you've built a network of people that has helped you along the way. And I know when we talked, you talked about the importance of networking, right? Of not doing it alone.
Right.
So I think, there's really good lessons and nuggets in this conversation. So Troy, I want to thank you. That's the story of Troy James, everyone. When I'm learning from these inspiring stories that none of these journeys are traveled alone, there's a lot of support along the way, whether it be individuals, organizations, sometimes a little bit of luck. I always say pulling yourself up by your bootstraps doesn't exist. It can't be done alone. It all requires the persistence and tenacity of the individuals who want to succeed. So thanks for listening, and I hope you were able to get something out of this conversation that you can use in your life and hopefully inspire you to help someone else in theirs. So if you like what you heard, please subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast with someone who you think might benefit. Thanks again, Troy.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, everybody, for listening.